Right, so good evening, everyone. Welcome to our virtual Q&A for the new Bauhaus. My name is Javier Chavez, and I am Associate Director of the Coral Gables Art Cinema. Before we start, I just have a few housekeeping items to go over first. The first one being that we are recording the conversation, so we will be making it available on our YouTube channel tomorrow so that you can rewatch it or share it with your friends, or do as you like with it. Secondly, we will be taking we're taking questions from the audience near the end of the Q&A. You are all welcome to send the questions directly to me, and I can read them out loud at the end. Or if you'd like to ask the question directly, you can click on the reactions button and then just raise your hand, and I'll unmute you so that you can ask the question. And finally, if any of you have not seen this wonderful documentary yet, the new Bauhaus is available to rent from our virtual screening room, thanks to the production company Open Docs. So you can rent it and watch from the comfort of your own home. Or if you'd like to venture out and visit the cinema, we are actually playing it in person tomorrow and Thursday. So whichever way you do it, I hope you really do watch this great documentary. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce the person who will be leading tonight's conversation, the founder and president of the Coral Gables Art Cinema, Steven Krams. Steven?
Good evening, everybody. I am so glad that you're all able to join us this evening for what we hope you'll find to be a most interesting Q&A on this outstanding film. I'd like to start off by, if it is permissible here, to ask some serious questions about how you got involved in this project and what made you decide to pick this particular project.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the question. Thank you for having me. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Petter Ringbom. I'm one of the producers and a cinematographer and / designer, animator for the new Bauhaus. Many hats were worn. With me is Marquise Stillwell, who is the executive producer of the film, who you will meet eventually as well. So the impetus for the film, we got started on this. The years have gone by, so it's hard to remember, and I feel like this past year probably counts for at least 2 years. But we got started on this at 2017, I think we first got started. And the impetus was a number of things. One was there was a retrospective of Laszlo Moholy-Nagy's work that opened first at Guggenheim here in New York, where I am, and then moved to the Art Institute in Chicago, and then finally to LACMA, Los Angeles County Museum of Art. It is really the biggest retrospective of his work that has ever that has ever been put together. And I saw the show at the Guggenheim, as did Marquise. And at the same time, we had got in touch with the Institute of Design, which, the new Bauhaus eventually became the Institute of Design. We have gotten in touch with them on a separate project. They were interested in doing some short films and approached us. And they had mentioned that they were thinking about doing something around their 80th anniversary. So the 80th anniversary of the founding of the new Bauhaus, and which we thought could be interesting. But what was approaching was the 100th anniversary of the German Bauhaus, which was in 2019. We felt like there was an urgency to do something around the American side of the Bauhaus story. We knew that there were people making films and TV shows, etc., about the German side of that. We were interested in what happens after, what happens when specifically Moholy tried to start up the new Bauhaus in Chicago. So we decided to essentially partner with the Institute of Design in that we told them we wanted to make this film, but we wanted to make it independently from the school. We wanted it to be a feature-length film, not a short film, something of substance. But we would very much welcome their support in terms of advice and knowledge, but also with funding. So that's essentially the beginning of it. The both Marquise and I think felt a certain instinctive connection to Moholy and his work. As I just mentioned before this got started, my background is in art and design, as is Marquise, my partner at Open Docs. I happened to have I went to art school here in New York called Cooper Union, which had a legendary teacher in art history named Dory Ashton, who was a rabid Moholy-Nagy fan. She loved him and put him like on a pedestal along with the greats of art history like Picasso and Matisse and so forth. She had sort of left that mark with me that Moholy is someone that you need to understand and to study and to learn from. So it felt like a kind of a no-brainer to do something that really dives into his work, but do it from the focus of his years in Chicago. Now, if you watch the film, you know that in the beginning, we do throughout the film kind of jump back in time to explore his childhood, his education, his German years and so forth, so that you can understand where he's coming from when he starts the school in Chicago. It's, which is certainly important. But we thought it was fascinating to see what he could do within this, the decade or so that he was operating in the US, and what what influence that had left on American art and design. And if you watch the film, you can see that the legacy is substantial. And I mentioned the school that I went to, and we certainly, my school existed long before the Bauhaus, but it very much adopted a Bauhaus methodology and very much in the lineage of the new Bauhaus. So I could see that just in my own experience from being a student 30 odd years ago or 25 years ago, what have you. His legacy was very much part of my my education and my history. So that was kind of the start for this project. And and we premiered it in 2019, in the fall of 2019. So a pretty quick turnaround. I mean, I think a little over 2 years from start to premiere, which is fairly quick for especially a film that has a lot of archival material and a lot of interviews and so forth.
This next question is really for Marquise. You chose a very special cinematographer, Hans Ulrich Obrist. And how did you come to make this kind of a creative choice? Marquise, are you there?
I think Marquise is still not quite with us.
Well,
so to clarify,
I'm here. It was muted. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Right.
If you don't mind taking that one, Marquise.
Yeah, no problem. And Petter obviously come in as well. I mean, we partnered doing this together. I think the genesis of that story was really trying to understand how to bring to life Moholy's story. This is a person that's no longer with us. So what do we do? We tried a couple of different, actors or individuals that we felt could represent him. But at the end, we borrowed from something that we had done in the past, where we actually decided to break that other wall in film and bring you closer to the audience and bring you into the film that way. And so that's why we chose Hans. And Petter, you can give a little bit more about Hans and your engagement with him.
Right, but just to clarify, Hans Ulrich Obrist was not the cinematographer. In fact, I was the cinematographer.
No.
Hans Ulrich Obrist was the provides the voiceover for the film.
Right.
He performs quotes of Moholy-Nagy on camera. So Hans Ulrich Obrist is, for those of you who don't know, is probably the most famous art curator in the world. He one of the few curators that has sort of a celebrity attached to him. he happens to also be someone who have long loved Moholy-Nagy. In fact, the first exhibit that he ever curated was a group show that included Moholy-Nagy's work. So he when we approached him, was very happy and excited to participate in the film. And because he, you know, he's a persona. I mean, he's not an actor, but he certainly has a, you know, a way of delivering these lines that is unique to him, and that is much more like performing as opposed to reading. And also someone who understands what Moholy-Nagy is saying in these quotes, the way an actor wouldn't, because we tried with an actor first and it felt very forced and not honest. But when you have someone like Hans-Ulrich Obrist who understands everything that Moholy-Nagy is trying to say, and he can deliver it in a really convincing way, and we thought was interesting. You know, and doing it on camera is a way to, again, try to connect more emotionally to someone as opposed to just hearing a voiceover. So he is I guess our little bit of a conduit to Moholy-Nagy via the form of Hans-Ulrich Obrist.
Yeah, regarding the creation of the film itself and how it took form, how do you contrast the conventional documentary with this sort of circular creation that you have?
Mm-hmm. Well,
go ahead, Petter.
Yeah. So what I said earlier, that we knew we had to, for the audience who did not know anything about the Bauhaus, we knew we had to give a foundation for what the Bauhaus was before we get to Chicago. And we also knew that we had to tell a little bit of Moholy's childhood and background in order for us for an audience member to understand and to connect with him. But we also knew that we couldn't make a chronological kind of documentary. Our focus was Chicago, right? We had to get to Chicago quickly, otherwise the film wouldn't work. So what we have done is essentially structure the film. You probably wouldn't notice as an audience member, we are structured thematically so that it's essentially segmented into 20 minutes chapters. The first of which is, the focus really is around the fine art aspect of Moholy-Nagy, which is where he came from. He did not come into his, this through design or architecture. It was fine art. He wanted to be a painter. And the first 20 minutes or so, we're laying the foundation of what the German Bauhaus was, but we also talked about how Moholy-Nagy was what many consider to be sort of first conceptual artist who would do things like call up a factory and have them, paint replicas of his paintings while he had them on the phone so that he could do like paintings of the same identical paintings in different scales, things like that. The second is around his trying to get the Bauhaus off the ground. We talk more about his design work, his graphic design work, and how he kind of merges art and commerce, because that's what he has to do when he gets to the U.S. I mean, this is especially at that time was very much focused on industry and commerce. So he had to merge that. And if you at all know about graphic design and branding, it's very much a merger of commercial interest and artistic pursuits. And then we talk about photography, which is the third chapter of his, and maybe for most people, probably what he's most famous for is his photography work, especially his photograms. And then the last chapter is about pedagogy. But throughout all these chapters, we always return to something in his childhood that is connected to that segment or that chapter. So it is actually both cyclical and linear, because we do follow his life from birth to death, but we do it in these sort of thematic chapters, if you will.
Moholy's story is an immigrant story, which resonates very strongly with lots of people today, especially in today's political climate. did you have this in mind when researching his life and putting together the documentary? What do you think this says about the kind of country America is?
Marquise?
Yeah, I think that was an interesting aspect of Moholy. I think that there was some overlay between, what was going with, say, African Americans, Black Americans coming up from the South and migrating north and meeting in Chicago a lot. And I think Chicago really posed an interesting meeting place for that time. If some people ask why not New York, but New York City was a lot more established in different ways. As we know, Gropius was in Boston. He didn't want to go to Chicago. But Chicago was a very special moment when it came to industry and commerce and all the intersections of the creative exploration that Moholy was very steeped in. And so I would say, in one sense, yes, the immigrant story is definitely embedded there. I would also say the ideal of surviving and what it meant to never give up, which is obviously a part of the immigrant story, is also something that is infused into Moholy Nagy and his ability to try his best to keep the school alive while also trying to do his work.
You mentioned a little earlier that pedagogy was a really also an important aspect and segment of what he was doing. And he wanted to work out an educational principle which strives for the closest connection between art, science, and technology. That's not only applicable to the architecture, the new Bauhaus is known for, but also for films, which have to balance those very same elements. How much of Moholy's philosophy do you think is applicable to film and, speaking broadly, our general day-to-day lives?
Well, it's hard to speak about film in general terms, because I think it's that our medium is incredibly subjective and broad, and people's approach to it varies quite a lot. Our approach to it, as people who come out of the art and design world, is very much the same kind of process that you would go through as in a design challenge or architecture challenge. We go through the same kind of stages that you do when you embark on a design challenge, with a really rigorous research and development phase, and then into a production phase when you actually are starting to make the thing, and then a post-production phase when you're really starting to build a thing, and then you take it out to the world. What we do, similar to a lot of designers these days, approach this this actually ties back into the structure of the film. We approach this in a very cyclical way. So these phases are not, silos, and that are very, very, very clear lines of where one phase starts and another one ends, or vice versa. Is actually the phases are existing at the same time. So we always do research as we are shooting, and we are start editing and making music while we are doing research, and they all inform each other, right? And which is how most people operate in the design world these days as well. You have to be very kind of cyclical in your approach, because you have to be very responsive to feedback. You have to be responsive to circumstances that are changing around you. If you're involved in architecture, that these things are constantly in flux, whether it's around delivery of materials, or zoning board issues, or what have you. Client needs, everything changes, and you have to constantly go back to think about your research again, or go back to think about your materials again, and so forth. So in some ways, I think the filmmaking is actually quite like other creative pursuits. One big difference, I think, for me, at least coming from more of a graphic design background, is the long-term process of it. where before we get started, thinking long and hard about what it is that we really want to spend, 3, 4, however many years you spend on a film on this specific topic. Is it worthy of that time? This was, like I mentioned, a fairly quick one. We have another film that we are still working on that we started before the Bauhaus, that by the time we're premiering that, it will have been about 6 or 7 years. That's a long time. In architecture it's probably equivalent, right? But in other creative pursuits that's a long time period. So sorry, there was a second part of your question too.
We're kind of running out of time here, so I want to get 1 or 2 other questions in, and then we'll turn this to the listeners and the viewers to ask their questions. What was the biggest takeaway about Moholy and his work after researching his career for the film? And what do you hope the audiences walk away with after watching your film?
Yeah, I guess I can take a first stab at that. I would say the whole idea around the process and experimentation. I think one of the challenges for why Moholy's name isn't up there with other names is probably because he was so focused on experimenting, playing, trying. I would say that he was probably ahead of his time in many ways. And a lot of people walk away from this film being excited about getting back into the process. A lot, particularly designer friends of mine who say, I feel like I got away. It was always about the outcome, the shiny object. And I feel like a lot of designers see this film and become inspired about going back in and experimenting and playing and not worrying about the shiny object.
And lastly, can you talk a little bit briefly about the new project that you're working on? Can you tell us a little bit about it? Sure.
Yeah, it's actually in some ways similar. It's also about an artist who's been dead quite a long time. It's about but very different kind of artist. There's the self-taught artist, or some people would use the term folk artist or outsider artist, named Nellie Mae Rowe, who was an African-American woman who lived and worked in the South, Georgia, outside of Atlanta, in the 20th century. So she was born 1900 and died 1982, and figured out a way against very difficult odds to dedicate her life to art. So we follow her, her life and her story and the obstacles and the things that are happening around her. Everything from the Atlanta race riots to the civil rights struggle, and up to the murdered and missing children of Atlanta in the 70s and 80s. Our approach is very different, and it's much more of what we call a hybrid film, where we are merging fictional storytelling techniques with nonfiction. So we're working with set building and with 3D animation. We're working with actors. Uzu Aduba, who's quite known now for her role at the TV series Orange is the New Black, and we recently played Shirley Chisholm on a TV show on FX. She is our Nellie Mae Rowe. She's our embodies our main character. But yeah, a very different approach, similar subject matter, and it hopefully will be ready to premiere early 2022. Looks like it.
Wonderful. Yeah. I think at this point would be appropriate, Javier, if you're with us there, to open it up to the audience for the Q&A part.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, like I said, feel free to send them directly to me and I can read them out loud. Otherwise, if you'd like to raise your hand there's a reactions button and you can click raise hand and I'll unmute you so you can ask it. Don't be shy. I guess the audience is being shy right now.
Are you guys having as cold of a weather as they're having in Texas, or is Florida still hot and balmy?
It's beautiful here.
Yeah, okay.
It was raining
You don't
earlier,
have
but
the 15-degree weather or whatever.
no, not right now.
Well, good for you.
If there's not any other questions, I can throw a few more.
I see a thermometer here, 73 degrees, not bad.
Yeah.
Would you take a few more questions that I had that I never got to?
Of course.
Yeah. Well, what about trends in design now, in the world of design? Does anything special appeal to you, or what's going on out there, and you could share it with us, of what you might see?
Well, it's hard to think about visual trends these days, because I feel like there aren't any dominating, at least not to me, innovative visual trends in design. I feel like it's all kind of it's highly derivative and nothing that feels unique to the time we're living in. I think what's more, something that I know probably, I mean, talking to Maholi's family, I know Maholi would probably be very excited about is more around technology, around the AI, artificial intelligence, and what we can do with technology these days. I think I know that's would be something that Maholi would dig into. I mean, when he lived, during his time, photography was the cutting edge, right? And that's what he embraced wholeheartly. The equivalent, I think, of today would probably be around artificial intelligence and that kind of work, which some artists and designers are involved with for sure. Visually, I'm a little disheartened by what I see from visually from designers, not necessarily from artists, but from designers. I feel like I have yet to see something in the last 5 years or so that really that I find incredibly innovative or exciting. There seems to be a bit of a uniformity at play with people's approach to design. I mean, look, the Bauhaus, a school that was founded 100 years ago, many would say the birth of modernism. And when I look around at what I see, it's a movement that's very much still alive and well, for good and bad. People are still dabbling in the same kind of, modernist language when it comes to graphic design, when it comes to furniture design, when it comes to architecture. It's all still informed by something that was born 100 years ago. Maybe that means that it was the ultimate expression of design, or maybe it just means that people have not, or we have not, found a different kind of language or something that can replace that movement, because to me it's still the dominant design movement 100 years later.
Any exhibits planned for his work anytime in the future?
I feel like that there's always exhibits of Maholi's work, and I would suggest that anyone who wants to dig deeper into Moholy-Nagy, the Moholy-Nagy Foundation is an excellent resource. It's actually, the URL is moholy-nagy.org, and they are one of our collaborators. It's run by the family, the Moholy-Nagy Foundation, with Hatala Moholy-Nagy, who, if you watch the movie, you're familiar with her. She is still very much involved in the kind of the work of keeping Maholi's legacy alive, and they always list the exhibits that are happening and the projects that are happening. They actually just, if you're a design person, you find it interesting. They just went through a redesign process of their own branding together with Pentagram in London, their London office. Pentagram is probably the most legendary graphic design firm that has ever existed. And I think they did a pretty good job. And if you go to their website, you can see it's on the homepage. You see their logo. It's very Maholi-ish, I would say. So and from there, from the Moholy-Nagy Foundation website, you can find out about current shows, but you can also, they have the proper bibliography of books to get and movies to watch and so on and so forth.
Yeah. We were talking before the audience came on a little bit about the movie business and the movie industry. And I'm in that part of the industry as well, and we're involved with design, and we're having to go through a catharsis during the pandemic of trying to reinvent our business and our business plans and so forth. And part of it is to reinvent the experience of cinema. What do you see as the future for cinema post-pandemic?
Oh boy.
I guess
Yeah.
better I can
Go ahead, please, Marquise.
sure. I mean, I think for our film, what's been exciting is that we have been able to get more eyeballs on our film. And so I do see that there's an opportunity for a combination for how audience show up, just not where. And so I think if we can start to look beyond the walls, meaning that allowing for outdoor theaters, which we did at the Parish Museum in the Hamptons, New York, I think versus just being a special moment, that's a way forward when how people want to experience film. I think we've learned that audiences are more flexible than we thought. I don't think it's going to replace in theater, but I do believe that there's going to be more flexibility.
Yeah, I think it's you know what's interesting for in our corner of the cinema landscape, you know, we make independently produced documentaries. I mean, it's very specific. We're not, you know, there's not superhero movies here. So the way that we distribute our films, I don't necessarily think will change dramatically from what was happening pre-pandemic. I think that the difference is around film festivals, because that is an important part of our sort of process of getting a film sold or getting a film seen. The festivals are struggling a lot and trying to figure out what to do going forward. And I think it's sad, probably, I see it's probably a sad effect of the pandemic is that a lot of the smaller festivals will have a hard time. They're already having a hard time, but it will have a hard time even after the pandemic. The big ones are going to be fine, but you know, the smaller ones have a hard, I think their existence is very much based on people going to a physical location together to watch films. Replicating that virtually online is very complicated because it's so much about the meeting of filmmakers and the audience, and filmmakers to each other, and audience to each other. It's about sort of community, right? That many have tried to, in the last year, tried to replicate that, and no one has succeeded. I think Sundance probably this year came the closest. That's probably because they have the most resources and the most, the biggest audience. But that is a tricky situation. I don't know. Sadly, I don't think that will a lot of festivals will go away, basically, if they haven't already. For us, making these kind of films, the streamers were already the most important platform, whether it's the iTunes or Amazon or Netflix or any of them, were already like the most important distribution channel. That has only heightened, and gotten more prevalent. That's so it had that part hasn't changed. I think it's more about the festival aspect of it. In Europe, it's a little different landscape, because in Europe, there's still the traditional broadcasters are still major players, and they haven't changed really during this whole period. In terms of independent movie theaters, more than I do, honestly. It's your space.
Have you had a chance to go to visit the Shed on the Skyline in
Sure.
New York?
Yeah. I saw an opera there not too long ago. Well, the pre-pandemic, it was great.
Yeah, the concept is quite unusual, and I think has has a lot of merit.
Yeah,
We have a couple of questions from the audience. Do you guys have a second?
sure.
So first one is from Diney, who asks, what other projects is Open Docs working on?
Right. So I mentioned the the film that I actually forgot to name the title for. It's "This World Is Not My Own" is the name of the title of the film about Nellie Mae Rowe and the world around her. This is the self-taught artist. We make films predominantly. We make feature-length documentaries that are focused around artists, designers, musicians who have a strong impact on society. Put it in simpler terms, people have said that we make films about creative underdogs, and I think that that's true. Basically, people who have to fight in order to get their work seen, and people have to fight in order to change the circumstances that they're living in. Whether it's with Maholi, who lived through 2 world wars and persecution as because of his Jewish background, fleeing the Nazis, at very economic hardship and eventually illness, and all through that whole experience was incredibly optimistic and always creative. The same with Nellie Mae Rowe, who's a self-taught artist who, in the American South during the 20th century, and I think you all know what that means. We made films prior to that in South Africa with people, artists and musicians who are struggling with freedom of expression 20 years after the end of apartheid. Those kind of stories are the ones that we feel passionate about and gravitate towards. And I think that we will continue making those kind of stories. I think our way of making films are changing, and that we are kind of embracing a bit more ambitious techniques and ambitious scopes. But at the core of it is always around what we consider really important creative individuals who may probably have not gotten their due, in the way that we think that they deserve.
My next question comes from Floor, and it's related to all the family members that were interviewed in the documentary, and were they all as involved as Maholi's daughter?
The other family members. So the family members that are in the film are Hatala, who's Maholi's daughter, and then there's Andreas Hug, who is one of Hatala's son, and then there's Daniel Hug, the other son. And yes, both of those, the sons are taking over the foundation, the work of the Maholi Nash Foundation. While we were making this film, that shift actually was happening. So the family archive was moving from Hatala's home to Andreas's home. So they are taking over the family business, if you will. And they were again also very generous with their time and support for the film.
No more questions from the audience so far. So Steven, I'll hand it back over to you.
Well, I want to thank our guests this evening for sharing their time with us and their thoughts, and want to welcome you anytime you have the moment when you're visiting us in Miami to come by and visit the cinema.
Oh, I'd love to.
Yeah, I think you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. I would love to do that.
Wish you all a very, very good luck with your new project and with this one, of course. And hope to see you again soon.
Thank you,
Awesome.
and
Yeah.
same to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your support.
Thank you, Flora. Thank you for your support, and of course to Javier for helping us out tonight and making this all happen. And we'll see you again, I hope, in the near future.
Thank
Have
you.
a wonderful evening.
Take care, everyone.
All right. Good night.